Hi, everybody. My name is Angel Conaselli, and I am a papillary thyroid cancer survivor since 2012 and 2013. I do a lot of volunteer work through ThyCa.org, through the Thyroid Cancer Connect email group, available on inspire.com, and also in Groups.io, which is another email support group, and I facilitate Zoom meetings every month. So I welcome all of our attendees and participants, and we have a tech person. His name is Cosmo. He's handling all the techie stuff for us, so we thank him for that. And I'm going to read off introductions and bios for our speakers. So we have Naveen Chaubal, a fellow of Film Independence Project Involve and Fast Track programs. He had a short film entitled Pinball, screened at the DGA, and it premiered online at nobudget.com. It won an Audience Choice Award. He co-produced Tomorrow We Despair, a feature documentary about the last days of a New Delhi artist colony, which screened at Hot Docs. Naveen has worked for AJ Plus, Vice News, and produced music videos for James Blake and Frank Ocean. So welcome, Naveen. There's Bryn Silverman. She's a filmmaker and a graduate of the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. She is an associate programmer for the Tribeca Film Festival. Her work examines myth making in American history. She was a story producer for Netflix documentary series Amend, The Fight for America, and an editor of the critically acclaimed documentary film Roll, Red, Roll. She's currently producing a film that follows her experience with papillary thyroid cancer. So welcome, Bryn. And then we have Kate Mitchell. She's a resident physician at Mount Sinai Hospital, School of Medicine, Psychiatry residency program. She met Bryn Silverman during her freshman year of college at USC, School of Cinematic Arts, where she completed her BA in film and television production alongside Bryn. Prior to attending medical school, Kate wrote, directed, produced her own films, they have been featured in various festivals. She has also worked as an assistant to acclaimed directors in the film and TV industries. Welcome to all three of you, and Cosmo, our tech person.
Thanks, Angel, and thanks, Cosmo, for your help. I'm Bryn. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll just describe what I look like. I have short, sandy blonde hair with wearing like a tan shirt. My cheeks are slightly red because I'm a little nervous. And here we are. This is my second ThyCa conference, and I spoke last year and presented this film in really early stages. I'm a papillary thyroid cancer survivor, and I was treated 3 years ago, but as we all know, the treatment carries on for a while, for life. And so when I come at this material around my story and our stories, I'm coming from a filmmaking perspective. And I'm not a doctor. I engage with a lot of different medical professionals in the making of this film. And so just want to share with you all some of that experience and talk through how using our stories is really an arsenal for us, and that reclaiming our perspective and our stories as patients can help us to sort of move forward and grow in our experiences. So though I come at this from the film perspective, you could come at this from whatever perspective is yours. So that could be anything from, your therapy sessions, your art form, your job, your relationships, whether you're a mom, whether you're a parent of some kind, or a caregiver. The stories abound, and I think that they are incredibly important to share and to acknowledge. So before we kind of go into that, let's see here. There we go. There's a book that I often refer back to by Siddhartha Mukherjee called The Emperor of All Maladies, and I'll have a screen share at the end of all the references that I use throughout this presentation. But he has a really lyrical way of talking about experiences with cancer and about even cancer, the disease itself. So this quote, "A patient long before they become the subject of medical scrutiny is at first simply a storyteller, a narrator of suffering, a traveler who has visited the kingdom of the ill. To relieve an illness, one must begin then by unburdening its story." So throughout this session and kind of throughout the thought process that we'll go through together, it's kind of about that. It's about unburdening the story. And before we sort of center on film, I think it's interesting to look back at sort of art, thyroid in art history, because you see representation of thyroid throughout the art world, and especially like the ancient art world. Da Vinci was actually he drew the first known drawing of the thyroid in 1510, which is the figure that you see there. So you can see it's not anatomically precise, but just the sort of early thinkings about what this thing looked like before we even knew what its function was. And there's a lot of evidence of goiter and thyroid swelling in early art. So here you can see in these ancient figures from Nigeria, Colombia, and Ohio, USA, that there's neck swelling, evidence of goiter. The one in Nigeria, you know, maybe those are nodules, hard to say, but it's interesting to see that there's different sorts of representation in ancient artwork. And then there's also a lot of representation in Mary, with her, a lot of neck swelling and paintings of her. I mean, there were hundreds that I went through to sort of look at all the different representations that she's taken. And it was actually considered in some of the literature, they talk about how an enlarged neck was actually considered beautiful. And so you'll see not just with representations of Mary, but throughout different art representations of women in paintings, that they'll have some sort of neck swelling. So now we shift to film, which is me, Kate, and Naveen's sort of forte. Medical themes have always been a really common and popular presentation in filmmaking. It's pretty strong drama. Illness is something that is often a challenge to be overcome. It makes for compelling plot points. In the 1930s and 40s, there are actually more than 100 films that exhibited medical themes. There are many films made about cancer and cancer survivors and patients, but there's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to how those stories are exhibited and how we see them. Cancer is often used as a story device. So it's the cancer that's centered, it's the illness that's centered, not the patient with all of their complexities. Either that or the cancer patient is the tragic plot point in the main character's journey. So they're, you know, the person going through something that the main character has to support or that affects the main character's life in some way. And that being said, there's very, very little representation of thyroid disease or cancer in film and television. Shockingly little. So I work a lot in the sort of personal narrative space, which is where we tell stories from our own perspectives. In film, that means turning the lens on ourselves. In other art forms, it can mean various things. It's about representation. So it's about our race, class, gender, our sexual orientation, where we live, how we live. It's the intersection of all of our different identities. I felt often in my cancer journey that the cancer narrative takes front and center, and the other identities that I inhabit sort of fall off. And that's just the spaces where you have to present yourself. What are you putting forward? I'd like to reclaim some of those stories so that it can all exist simultaneous, and then we don't have to decide between being, you know, this person or that person. We talk a lot, or we've seen with Roger Ebert, who is the film critic. He went through thyroid cancer and was really vocal about it. And he, of course, has a really large sphere of influence, but it's my belief that we all have a sphere of influence of some kind, and that you don't have to be famous to have influence in your community and on those around you with your story. So what we see often in film and television are a lot of stereotypes. And I think whether you're a thyroid cancer patient, survivor, caregiver, clinician, or otherwise, I think this will resonate and you'll start to recognize some of these stereotypes that are perpetuated. One of them being that all cancer patients look and act sick. We know that with thyroid cancer, it's often symptomless, that some thyroid cancer patients don't have to go through chemotherapy. Often in film and TV, you see all cancer patients go through chemotherapy. There's this idea that cancer patients with good outcomes that have survived their cancer are superheroines or heroes. I don't know about you all, but I didn't feel superhuman when I was going through my treatment. And so some of those stereotypes, they can be harmful. This next one about cancer being a quote battle, I'm sure you all heard the sort of terminology around, the war on cancer, that we win or we lose our battle or our fight against cancer. And there's a reason why this language exists. And again, in the book that I reference often, The Emperor of All Maladies, he talks about why this is. And essentially from the 40s onward, cancer had got like a really, really strong PR campaign. And a lot of this language that's left over came from that. It ended up being a huge push for funding and research for cancer umbrella generally. But I find that some of that verbiage can be just not super accurate to the experience. I didn't want to be at war with my cancer. I wanted to be at peace with it. And so some of that language that we see perpetuated in film, television, and even outside of that can be a struggle. There's also this idea and representation that all cancer patients have caregivers in their lives who help them through their illness. We just know that this is not true. And just generally speaking, that there's, cancer treatment is a one size fits all experience. And even within, thyroid cancer, we know that there's so much diversity in treatment, in decision-making, and in the care that follows. So I think in film and TV, some things are changing. I mean, the more people who are able to come into their authority with cameras, the stronger and more complex and nuanced the narratives are becoming. So we're on like a really slow journey to a better place, but I think so far these stereotypes are pretty much generally perpetuated. So at this point, I kind of want to show you, this is a clip that I put together, and it wasn't easy to put together because it's quite frankly hard to find stories about cancer in film and TV, but this is sort of a compilation of some scenes from different films, and we'll see how they do it, how they approach cancer representation. So I'm gonna go, there might be a little bit of a trial and error when we do this, but let's see how it goes. Oh.
What are you doing?
Oh, just feeling a thyroid. Feels like there's a little nodule on the right side there.
Nodule.
Mm-hmm. I can't be sure just by feeling. What I'd like you to do is have a scan.
Well, what does that mean, have a scan?
Oh, there's nothing to it. You lie on a table and they pass the machine back and forth across your throat. I'll arrange it for tomorrow, and I'll have you drink a little iodine solution before you leave today.
You're gonna have me drink iodine?
Well, just a drop or so in solution is perfectly safe.
Sure. And a little skull and crossbones on the bottle?
Well, this won't be household iodine. This is radioactive.
Why don't you say so?
Have you ever seen Terms of Endearment?
Going to give my daughter the shot! Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wainwright? What does prognosis mean? It means what the future of a case looks like. What does negative mean? That's not so good. It means hopeless.
Adam, just tell her.
Tell me what? I have cancer. What do you mean you have cancer?
We can withhold treatment for a little while, but not for long. We'll have to begin therapy sometime during the next few weeks. Act as normal as possible, for as long as possible. That's really the best thing.
Normal.
Even though you had freaking cancer, you're willing to give money to a corporation for the chance to acquire even more cancer? Let me just tell you that not being able to breathe sucks.
It's little and it kills.
Right.
On the tumor. Who's next?
Let me explain that thyroid cancer is one of the most manageable forms. It's very slow to spread. very slow as a rule, and surgical removal of the thyroid usually stops it. In other words, if you had to get it, you couldn't have chosen a better place.
Yeah, I can. Somebody else's throat. That's a lousy thing for me to say.
So as we can see in some of those clips, pretty homogenous across the board of who the patients are and who we're seeing on screen. And also just like great hyperbole in some of the experience. You don't see a lot of the quiet or the home or the experiences that happened around the cancer. And of course, the cancer is the central issue. We don't learn a lot about those folks as people in those films. So what's at stake when we don't have the sort of diversity of information in film and television? I'm sure that we've all experienced as thyroid cancer survivors a level of ignorance in the people that we share our experiences with. I find that other people's reactions can be more harmful than healing. Everyone has their own advice, their own opinions about our treatment, which they pro-offer very freely. And could some of this be prevented? Could there be more of a basic vocabulary around thyroid cancer or even thyroid function with more representation in media? Another big issue is just misinformation. We're in an era where people are increasingly looking to the internet and to media for health-related information. And so it's on us as media makers to make sure that that information is easy to find and that it's trusted information. For example, like The Fault in Our Stars was a really popular book and movie, and it did a pretty decent job, honestly, of depicting her specific thyroid cancer situation. But now it's become this sort of trusted source across the board because it's the only source. Not only that, but most films and filmmakers are not liaisoning with actual health practitioners. So there's a lot lost there when there are some assumptions made. And you'll find that, I'm sure you've all found and will continue to find, that there's a lot of misinformation around thyroid cancer on the internet and otherwise. And that most common cancers are rarely represented in film and television. It's generally a form of cancer that's really, really hard to treat, that becomes the sort of central issue because they need the drama. And I think some of our agency can be lost. When other people are telling our stories, they have privilege to our agency. This belongs to us and we can reclaim it. And I think this goes back to representation. But I think that is something that is grossly at stake. And this kind of brings me to this term in psychology called availability bias. And it's about the sort of influence of stories and the availability of information and how that information affects our thinking. So for me, when I was first diagnosed, one of the first things I did was reach out to other people who had similar experiences, or try to connect with people who had similar experiences I had, or that as I was going through. And a lot of what they told me influenced the way that I sort of approached my decision-making as a patient. If they had a really, really good outcome with something, I'd be like, oh, I want to do that. If they had a really bad outcome doing something, it freaked me out and I would most likely not go towards that. And so when we talk about this term, it's kind of about exploring the availability of information. And I think that's what makes ThyCa so important, because there's a deep pool here of experiences. And so the more diverse and expansive that pool becomes, the more enabled we are to make decisions that come from who we are as patients. And there was this great book that was recommended to me a while ago, Your Medical Mind, How to Decide What is Right for You. And I found that to be, it kind of sets up those metrics around how information is relayed, how stories influence our thinking, how case studies influence our thinking, and that the presentation of this type of material has a big impact on us going forward as patients. So again, going back to media and representation, if there were more diversity, if there was more information, how would that affect patients' access to care? So we turn the focus, and this is why, we're so obsessed with film and art, but I think also why different art forms could be so expansive in this topic, because what we can benefit from turning the focus on ourselves is that it centers an emotional experience, which can trigger an emotional response that we've learned psychologically can move audiences or move those engaged in the community to change or to learn. So in film, we talk a lot about impact strategies and impact campaigns. So that's, who's your audience? Who's the person who's going to watch this project? Who are the people that you want to inform or move or validate? For me, the film is a lot about validating other thyroid cancer patients, and to also provide resources that can be sort of a shortcut in the treatment process to find resources to figure out how to approach your decision making in your care. And this sort of in a grassroots sensibility is about increasing that visibility around thyroid cancer, which long term can lead to sort of more focus on alternative treatments or new treatments that are coming out, increased funding. And those are sort of like the metrics that we can measure, but also even like a basic vocabulary around what the thyroid does, so that we as patients aren't burdened with educating everyone in our sphere to some of that information. If that were more common knowledge, then it would be really helpful. So with this type of visibility comes increased representation. And I also just believe that art generally can tackle gray area and these sort of liminal spaces that we as patients live in a way that clinical spaces just can't. I mean, we often go to those spaces for hard and fast data and statistics, but I think often the experience is one of unknowing, especially with thyroid cancer. There's a lot of sort of acceptance of the unknown that you kind of have to embrace. And that can be really hard. So when we turn to art, I think it helps us sort of deal with the fact that our healing is not linear. So all that to say, the film that I'm working on is a lot to do with some of this non-linear healing. I learned, so when I set out to make this project, it was originally going to be a series, and each episode was going to center a different thyroid cancer patient, so we could kind of educate sort of to the vast spectrum of experiences that we have as thyroid cancer patients. And in the research and development phase for that project, learned that I may not have received complete treatment. So I sort of fall, since the 2015 guidelines, I'm kind of in the gray zone of whether I should or shouldn't do radioactive iodine treatment. And so in making that project and starting to work on that project, I learned this and decided to start flipping the camera on myself to see, what we could learn. I honestly didn't even really know where it was going to go, but I wasn't very comfortable being on camera, but I felt that there was something to be found. And so what I'm about to show you is a longer teaser. If you were here last year, it's a more evolved. You'll see kind of how the story is evolving. It's still a teaser, but I'll just leave it at that and we can kind of discuss it afterwards.
We consider you to be a boat floating on the sea of life. And your health issues are holes in the bottom of your boat taking on water. You've come to me to plug up specific holes. But if I see other holes, I have two choices. One, I could just plug up the holes you came for and watch you sink. Or you could say to me, I'd like you to keep my boat floating. What do you prefer?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as anxious as I think I would be. I'm not as anxious as like the very beginning when I was diagnosed, but it's just kind of like, are you kidding me? Why did I not know about that?
What is it?
It's called VBRAF 600E. And it's characterized by like a more aggressive type of thyroid cancer. It's just
Metastasized, is that right?
yeah.
Ground floor. Distribution.
Oh my God.
Mary single board,
Could you turn it up a little bit higher? Volume?
So here for papillary. Yeah. And can I have you verify your date of birth? Yes, 12/13/88. You could give me your name again. Bryn Silverman. Can you say your name for me again? Bryn Silverman.
It'll be VERMAN.
Bryn, could you turn up the volume?
You know how like a mold, if you wipe it down, it'll just go back. I'm thinking it's like that.
Am I intermediate risk or low risk?
You are low risk. Did my level of risk change between those guidelines?
That's a good question. I have to do a bit more research.
How do you know what's in your liver? How do you know what's in your bone? How do you know what's in your bone? Does everybody have to hit the windshield with their face and body before they can understand?
What happened to your heart? Was it just faulty from the start? That gnawed and clawed at the most vital parts of your most vital organ until bang, that thing just stopped working.
Do you think I'll always have a little bump here?
I don't know. Stop working.
Yeah, I'm just calling to see about getting my pathology from a surgery I had a couple years ago.
So what happened to your heart? Did you see it coming?
It's gonna come down to just me having to decide.
Yeah.
I just have to decide. So I'm curious to kind of talk through that with you all when we opened it up in a few minutes here. But I wanted to share some titles of films that have really influenced me, and they're not about thyroid cancer necessarily, but they're films that follow the sort of medical decision-making journey and not only the emotional impact, but some of the logistical impact as well. I feel like these films really do it right and done a lot of good. And I can share these slides later if that's easy too. So now kind of opening it up, I'm curious to sort of explore how you all tell your stories in whatever settings that you use, whether that's in a craft or a craft that you want to explore, and sort of examining some of the tools that we have at our disposal, like writing it out. I found often in appointments that you can use your phone. If you ask your doctor, you can record audio using the voice memo function on the phone. And those kinds of things can be really helpful because you're ingesting so much that it's sometimes hard to process and keep top of mind what you've learned. And listening back later was also kind of an interesting experience. It's like, it felt like I was like a year ago, but I felt like I was like 10 years ago, like a completely different person. And then also like engaging your team, like who are the people around you who hold space for you that makes you feel validated. It's not necessarily your family or your partner or your friends even, but what are those spaces that really feel like where you really feel like you're being held and heard and validated. And also in film, and I think this is sort of transferred over into life as well for me, especially in this sort of gray area, is often asking questions and like targeting what the questions are can be really helpful, maybe equally as helpful, if not more sometimes, than having the answers. I think the answers are really hard to come by, but the questions can be more of a quicker process in developing. It's a good starting place to sort of start to figure things out for yourself in terms of your story and your journey. And then also finding your platform. So when we talk about audience in film, who's your audience and what does that look like? You know, is it ThyCa? Is it ThyCa support groups? Is it friends? Is it fireside chats, with your dog, or is it Instagram or social media? I mean, those spaces can be really great when you feel alone. They can also be very harmful when used in the wrong ways, but they can be really powerful tools for, especially in like health fields and with patient advocacy. And so kind of switching gears, I'm just curious to kind of open it up at this point, and hear from you all about sort of what kind of patient you are, how you even sort of like respond to that question, the conversations that you had with your doctors, and whether you found yourselves frustrated or what frustrates you, and how you sort of advocate for yourself in those spaces, and how this experience is unique to you. And yeah, I think at this point we can sort of open it up. I haven't seen any of you, so I'm curious to see who you are.
We do have a couple questions in the chat box, so we begin with Bob, because if you can see it, he's one of the 2 longest surviving anaplastic thyroid cancer patients, and 62 going on 20 years out. That's amazing, Bob, to have that far back. He has a blue story that his 14-year-old son and neighbor started in 2003. His son is now a world famous painter and uses his story and the color blue in all of his paintings. Blue represents hope and healing. They get good read with it and awareness. So if you'd like to comment about that, Bob, and if Kate and Bryn and anybody has any comments they can add to that, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I'm Bob. I live in Kansas City. I live in New York as well. And so I was in Big Pharma, and I was diagnosed in 2003. And, coming from Big Pharma, I knew that we didn't create drugs for rare disease states. And when I heard, that movie kind of resonated when they were talking about thyroid cancer is the easiest cancer to have. And that's kind of what I thought. And there was a little vanity behind it. I was like, well, I'll be off work for a couple weeks, and but I don't want a big scar. And then I found out I had anaplastic, and I was told I had 90 days to live. And this was at Johns Hopkins. So I was turned down by MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, Dana-Farber, Cancer Centers of America, University of Kansas, because I was told I would be a bad outcome ratio for their numbers. And obviously this was before HIPAA and everything else. And Cancer Centers of America was an interesting story because we called them up, and I have a family with a medical background, and they were talking to one of the volunteers there. And they got back on the phone and they said, well, we just talked to one of our oncologists, and they said that you'll be dead before you could make your appointment. And I was like, wow, that was a little harsh. And so that was kind of the reality. And then Johns Hopkins, a doctor there, Dr. Paul Ladenson, he took me on. He said, I'm one of the leading thought leaders in thyroid cancer. And I had knew of him from the pharmaceutical industry. And he had told me that he goes, everyone survives any cancer. I mean, he goes, there's always a survivor of whatever disease state there is. And he goes, there's no reason that we shouldn't try to make you be one of them. And I thought, well, heck, I guess I could try to be in that 1%. And I was 43, very healthy. And that's kind of when the journey began. And it was a long story. And to jump to the blue story, my next door neighbor was a chaplain, and our kids played together. And she said, I want you to think of the color blue, because I had to be on the table, and it was raised 7 feet high, and I had to be hit at 8 different angles. And as many of the thyroid patients know, they make that plastic mouth with the 2 nose holes and the 2 eye holes and strap you in. And I signed a death waiver to do experimental radiation. So as of to date, today, I just talked to Johns Hopkins the other day, I still have the most radiation known that's been given worldwide. And there's one other friend who I reached out to. She was another patient, and she was a year ahead of me, and she was 34 when she got diagnosed, so 10 years younger. And she was kind of my savior, because she told me the hell that I would go through. And she goes, but you'll be sitting on my deck in Connecticut a year later, and we'll be having drinks talking about this. And I was, but the blue story comes into play is my son was very athletic, but very artistic as well. And it kind of shut him down. And he just started drawing at the time, and he would stay by my hospital bed and just draw, and was becoming very withdrawn. When you have that talk with your kid that you're not going to be here in 90 days. And so, yeah, it was, the chaplain came in and she goes, Bob, every time you get on that radiation table, I want you to think of the color blue and thinking of your cells turning blue and healing yourself. So I started to explain to my son that it was like a wash of paint going through me, because I'm a painter as well. And everything was healing with this blue, and it calmed me down during those twice-day radiations, which I had 7 days a week for 4.5 months. And that was every day. And so to date, long story short, he started painting in every canvas that he painted. He went to Parsons in New York and had a color blue underneath it, and the instructors couldn't understand why. And he was like, it's just hope and healing. And even when I'm done with the painting, if there's no blue showing, I know that there's blue under that painting. And so just kind of an interesting story, and then it's in his website and everything, but it has brought awareness to anaplastic, because he's known so much worldwide that he tells the story everywhere he goes. So that's kind of my blue story. And Bryn, I appreciate your story, was great. And I mean, just watching that short clip, I certainly want to see the whole thing. Yeah, it's a journey that we're all on, and mine's been quite an unusual journey. You know, you get to that point where you even have survivor's guilt, where I go to, I speak for Johns Hopkins to their second-year endocrine students, and other medical institutions too. And yeah, it's just an interesting path that I've been on, and now you just want to help people, and that's what I love so much about ThyCa.
Yeah,
That's my story.
Thank you for sharing that. That's you give people, I'm sure many people, hope, and maybe they'll be able to get in touch with you. The sessions are recorded. You know, I don't know if you provide.
Absolutely.
And so, thanks.
Anyone can
again.
contact me at any time.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, it's just amazing. It makes me think, you know, it's like the experience of going through treatment and the experience of ourselves as the thyroid cancer patients, and then the sphere around us and the impact, and how, I mean, it's incredible that he started doing that. And then I'm sure for you all, it was sort of this like collaborative, even just emotionally collaborative experience of like putting some of that energy somewhere.
Absolutely. Like you said, art plays a big role. And for me, it's played a huge role. And
yeah.
So I totally get that.
I just want to make sure that we get everybody in as much as we can. We have about 20 minutes left, 15 minutes really. So I'm looking at the opposite. We have Patrick that wanted to share with us that he was diagnosed at the age of 14 in 2014. So that's the other end of it, like children and adolescents coming down with, you know, this diagnosis of any kind of cancer, but thyroid cancer. And they don't realize the severity of it, that you must consume a artificial, non-human thyroid hormone replacement pill every day for the rest of your lives. They don't understand that at that age. Even adults don't understand that. So there's a lot that the medical world does not tell us. And I appreciate Patrick sharing a little bit. He's 23, he says now, and he had his surgery in radioactive iodine, as many of us have gone through, and the isolation, and that's tough on a kid, on anybody, but it's tough when you have a heavy work schedule or a social life that you have to remain distanced from everyone. It kind of sets you apart, but hopefully you can use all of your experience to help others, as Bob stated. So we appreciate that, Patrick. If you wanted to share anything, you know, go ahead. Okay. If not, that's fine. Then we have, you know, if the panelists would like to look through the questions and see what,
I think Patrick did say that he wanted to share.
yeah, I'm looking through that, but I don't hear him. Let me see if he's, maybe Cosmos can unmute him.
And I think Glenn also said that they would like to share as well.
Right.
Oh, there's Patrick. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Hoyak. I am from a small town called, Okay, could you guys see my face? Yes?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Maybe? All right, cool. So, hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Hoyak. I am from a small town. I'm right near the Mexican border called Douglas, Arizona. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer at the age of 14, and the year was 2014. I had to undergo surgery. The surgery was Londo down in Tucson because the surgeon had to take his time going in, taking out my thyroid. But if you guys wanted to know how long it was, the surgery was about 7.5 hours, roughly close to 8 hours long. And the surgery went well. I had to spend the night in the hospital down in Tucson. After that, I stayed another night at a hotel as well. And then after that, I actually stayed at my grandma's house in Tucson. And so after the surgery, I had to undergo radioactive iodine, which means I had to take a small pill and I had to be in isolation for 5 days. And I also had to do the low iodine diet, which, to be honest, it was kind of suck for me. But overall, I just did just fine, no problem at all. And so far, my health and everything else is going really well. I have been exercising a lot. I'm actually a runner though, in case you guys didn't know. My dad, he used to be a runner a long time ago down in Douglas, in which where I am from, and he wanted me to become a runner as well. But to be on, I just wanted to just also say 2 week, well, a week from this Wednesday, it's going to be my dad's 5-year anniversary of his passing because he passed away due to a long battle of a brain tumor, which was glioblastoma. And fast forwarding until now, so far I am doing just fine and I'm trying to exercise as always. My dad's favorite motto, and I wanted to share this with all of you guys, was do good and be good. In December of 2021, they found a suspicious lymph node on my right side of my neck, which was, they had thought that, oh my gosh, my cancer had came back. And so the doctors had said, I can do either a biopsy or I can just go in and take it out. And so what we did was he biopsied it, and a week later ago, I got the results. It was negative, which was malignant, which also means no surgery at all, which I was super, super pleased to hear about this. And they just said that they're just going to keep an eye on it, see if it grows bigger or if it turns out to be smaller, which I am hoping it will be. Then, yeah, that's basically it. If you guys have any other questions, just as always, feel free to reach out to me. I am always willing to give you guys some advice, some pointers, etc. I'm just, as always, a phone call away, everyone. Thank
Thanks,
you very much.
Thanks, Patrick.
You're welcome.
I see there's a question. Somebody's asking for you to talk about how you selected your medical team and how you tell that part of your story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that
my,
was.
oh,
No,
I
I'm
think that
sorry.
was a question for Bryn, actually.
Right.
We could all answer this question.
Oh,
We could all be on for like 9 hours talking through the medical issues. So when I had known about my tumors for a while, and I was living in Jordan and then Germany, and they did different, they had sort of different approaches in monitoring over there at that time. And so when I moved back to the States, my PCP here was like, we should get you back in. Well, I guess rewinding, I was on Medicaid, so my options were pretty slim. And so finding a PCP, like found a great PCP. She's, she's pretty good as far as primary care doctors go. But then when she recommended that I do a biopsy again here, because all of my records were in German and Arabic, and they, they could see the imaging, but they couldn't read the sort of analysis. And so waited like 6 months because I got a job and went to New York for 6 months. When I came back, I'm based in Kentucky. And when I came back, did the biopsy, and they came back malignant. And at that point, because I'd known about the tumors, I went in with really little worry. I didn't think, and I'd had them biopsied, and they actually shrank in size over the 3 to 5 years that had been between the two biopsies. So it was a bit of a shocker. And then I saw someone mention in the chat that the news, Tresia, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, that the news was broke to you over the phone. Same for me. And it was like the nurse, and they didn't even tell me I had cancer. They just said that they'd scheduled an appointment with the surgical oncologist. So I was like, started freaking out. I'm like, what does that mean? And so started really doubting my PCP at that point, but went forward with her. And when I met the surgical oncologist, she was great, but it all happened so quickly after that point. I think between the biopsy and surgery was like maybe a month and a half. And I'm learning now that that's pretty common. The sort of like panic of, cancer, and then the sort of like the trajectory they kind of put you on. It's like, well, this is who you go to, and this is what you do. And I think in retrospect, and what the film has kind of taught me, was that like I should have slowed down a little bit. I mean, it's hard because the anxiety is so profound. And so it was just about getting it done and moving on. And I think in retrospect, and what I tell a lot of people now, is just like taking like that extra month. I didn't even really look around. I did my homework around like, that the surgeon should do like 300 plus surgeries a month. Like some of the metrics around like what makes a good surgeon. There's a lot of focus on like the surgeon and the surgery, the lifestyle, and the treatment plan after. It was like, I mean, even still, it's been a struggle. And my endocrinologist now, she's really, really great in terms of like engaging with me and like collaborating with me, because I found that it is a collaborative process with the doctors. It's like I found that the best doctors are like open to that collaboration and open to like whole body health and an understanding how this is impacting you, not just in the ways that you're like coming at them, but in all the other spheres, and looking at like quality of life, and like what kind of patient you are, what your comfort levels are, what you want to do with your life. So all of that's kind of come into play. But in the making of the film, I've started meeting all of these incredible practitioners like around the world, really, who are just, I mean, it's different because I'm not their patient. So they're not giving me direct advice, but they're super engaged in like patient-centered care, and in sort of like flipping some of the narrative that I think historically was really patriarchal in medical schools around like how treatment is given. So from my understanding in some of those spheres, that's changing a little bit to sort of put some of the power back in patients' hands. But my experience was like very much not like that. Tracy, do you want to share? Am I pronouncing your name right? Or sorry, or Nandini?
Yeah, that was me. That was my question.
Oh, great.
I really wanted to share about my experience with the medical team. Last year, so I was diagnosed in 2016. And then last year I had a recurrence. So last year at this time, they told me that I had to have this horrendous surgery, and they were going to take out my voice box, and I was going to have a feeding tube, and I was gonna have a breathing tube and all this nonsense. And they were putting, well, I'm just saying that even the first time around, there was, like you said, there was all this pressure to do it quickly, do it quickly. And I was like, wait, this is my body, this is my life. I need to educate myself. I need to, figure this out. But there was so much pressure. I mean, I'm very lucky. I live in a very resource rich area. So there were a lot of surgeons around here that I could talk to. And, I even had one surgeon like call me like every Friday afternoon. He would call me at home to say, have you had your surgery yet? And I was like, gosh, that's intrusive. So yeah, I'm a contrarian person. So the more I felt pushed, the more I resisted that. And I did end up doing the surgery, but it took like 4 or 5 months to pick my team and to decide what to do. And I was very happy with that selection. But then last year when my tumor came back, they again put all this pressure on me to go for this surgery, this horrendous, barbaric surgery. And, I'm very happy with my surgeon, but he's a surgeon. That's all he can think about, surgery. So he called me up after that and he said, it was actually my son who saved my life. But one day he heard me. We live in a walk-up apartment. And so I purposely chose that because I thought if I have to do stairs every day, I'm gonna be fine, And so one day I walked up the stairs and he said, Mom, you're wheezing. Why are you wheezing? This was last year in August. And so then I listened to myself and I was like, yeah, I'm wheezing. So I called up the doctor and I said, these are what's happening to me is I'm wheezing. He was like, I need to see you tomorrow. Okay. So I went to see him the next day. And he checked me out and he said, I need your CT scan today. Go downstairs. We were in the hospital. Go downstairs and get the CT scan right now. So I did. And then the next day, he called me up and he said, the tumor is growing and it's blocking your airway and you're not getting enough oxygen. And, I have to go in right now and blah, blah, blah. And he told me all this and I was like, wait, let me think about it, He said, oh, you're not getting enough oxygen. I said, okay, well, I can solve that. So I got one of those oxygen meters and I said, okay, I'll monitor. And if it's going down, I'll let you know. And so I thought about it just one night. And the next day I called him up. I said, I'm not having that barbaric surgery. You better go back to the drawing board and come up with more options because I'm not going to live that life. And so he's a good doctor. So he did. He hooked me up with, all the other disciplines, and we were able to find another therapy. But, and I'm still here, and my tumor has shrunk. I mean, it's a miracle. Like when they told me about this possible treatment.
What you're saying is the idea of you have to advocate for yourself. No matter what it's your decision, you have to educate yourself on your own and advocate for yourself. So thank you very much for sharing that. I appreciate it. I have, it's 4:58, so we have till 5, but we could go a little bit past that if we have to. And I'd like to, I think Cosmos promoted someone up that we'd like to respond to, if you can see her question. Yeah. So she's here, she's 33, and she's having an issue because she was diagnosed 6 months after the birth of her baby. So she's going through a lot of hormonal changes. And it's just so different for everyone. Everyone has a story. Your story is unique to yourself, to your body, and yet it can help other people when you share it. And it
Mhm.
helps yourself. It helps yourself with the whole healing process. So if you'd like to, speak a little bit about, what your experiences, we
Yep, sure.
appreciate.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I had my baby last April 2021, and that was just the most magical thing because I worked hard to get what I wanted with her birth. So I was like on a natural high and being so happy, like the happiest I've ever been in my life, I feel like. And then I got COVID over the summer and had some swollen lymph nodes. And that's when I noticed I had swollen lymph nodes in my neck. And I went to my primary, and, they kind of thought it was, well, you had COVID. And so, it didn't go down. So that led to an ultrasound, which led to a biopsy, which led to the diagnosis. I was at work and a phone call thinking, oh, I'm going to get results. Oh, it's going to be nothing to worry about, but the first thing that came out of her mouth was, you have papillary thyroid cancer. And you just hear the word cancer. And, I felt like I just went to the lowest point in my life right then and there. And like everything just crumbled around me because I didn't know anything about thyroid cancer, nothing. And that was really hard, just thinking, the first thought was my babies, my children. And I felt completely rushed into my decision to go surgery. And unfortunately, I had to go to a facility a few hours from home for surgery. And I think some things got missed maybe during my surgery. And unfortunately, I have to have a second surgery here coming up at the end of the year because there's still some residual disease left in my neck. But yeah, it's so important to advocate for yourself, because I don't think if I would have advocated as strong as I did for myself, I wouldn't have fallen into the hands of some wonderful physicians at MD Anderson. That's where I'm going now, which is pretty far from home, but I'm so thankful. My husband even says, I feel like I would just say yes to everything the doctors are saying and not question anything because they're the experts. But what's important for me is having the right doctor for you. They may be the right doctor for someone else, but maybe not for you. And that's my biggest thing that I think about, is just the right fit for you. I'm more than a diagnosis. I am an individual. So yeah, I had to quit breastfeeding my baby, which breastfeeding is super important to me. And I had to, isolate away from my children for 2 whole weeks is what they recommended when I had to do my RA.
Can you hold on a second? I think whoever has a little baby crying in the background, is that you?
That's my baby.
They're okay?
She is. She is.
You can mute, but you can't mute if it's you.
No, she's just laying there.
She's your
trying
gift.
It's nap time over here at my house. But anyways, so yeah, that was just not being afraid to question things. And it's been a journey. It hasn't even been a year since I've been diagnosed, but I've learned a lot. And I just sure wish the doctor who broke the news to me would have had those resources available, like ThyCa and ATA and what's credible resources. Because I was told on a Friday afternoon and everything's closed on, the weekend. So I will never forget that moment in my life, but somehow I've already grown tremendously from it. And it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. And it's going to continue as a wild ride as your hormones fluctuate, as you change and you age and you lose weight or gain weight. There's a lot to learn, and you just have to keep up with it. So thank you. I appreciate it. Congratulations on your baby and
thank you.
New little life. So we have about 7 minutes, maybe less than that. So Bryn and Kate, and if you guys wanted to say anything or take it, a step further, I don't think there's anything else out there that we need to address. I'm looking through.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks to Teresa for sharing her story. And this idea that, like when we become patients, the irony that we're not there isn't a lot of space allowed to figure out like what kind of patient you are. And there's not a lot of nuances in those clinical conversations around like what's right for someone else might not be right for you in the same sort of like clinical scenario. So, what I hope with the film and what I hope just, for doctors going forward is that there's a little bit more of that nuance. And I understand that the system doesn't necessarily encourage, time spent. There's not a lot of quality time we get to spend with our doctors. But I think some of those shortcuts around, like Teresa was saying, ThyCa and ATA, support groups, there's so much to be learned from other people. And my first conference last year with ThyCa, I was 2 years in, and it was like my mind just exploded with, everyone's stories and actually feeling a part of a community. So yeah, I hope that, the film can be accessible in a lot of ways for not only patients, but for providers as well.
I'd like to just interject Glenn. He wanted to share his story. So he says it goes back to when he had an acoustic neuroma in 1984 to when he was told that he probably wouldn't make it home after surgery for another anaplastic thyroid cancer last year. And to him, it's a God journey. So whatever your faith affiliation is, or your relationship with the universe or God or our creator, that's very much a part of it. We're not just our bodies, it has to be mind, body, spirit, mind, body, soul, however you want to think of it. And that's what gets us through. So moving forward, we have like less than 5 minutes. So, and Bryn just posted something here about if you'd like more information about the film, she provides her contact information and the, the link. Okay, so did you want to make any closing remarks, anybody?
Well, just thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And
yeah, we appreciate your joining us and being able to share. Hopefully this is helpful to everyone and to our tech person Cosmos, because we definitely need somebody teching behind the scenes with us.
Yeah, thank you, Cosmos.
Yeah, hopefully.
It was nice working with you guys.
Yes.
Work with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck with the rest of your conference. I wish everyone a good evening.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Angel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice working with you guys. It was very informative. Thank you.
Thanks, Cosmo. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.